Hi everyone, welcome to the session. Today we are going to have a look at Amazon Bedrock agents. More specifically, we're going to create a very simple agent in the AWS console, and then we're going to invoke the agent using a Python script. It's going to be super simple, no tools, no knowledge bases, just a very basic how do you create a simple agent that can respond to input events based on a specific prompt. So if we go through the blog post, it's got a lot more details than what we're going to be covering today, but it's very informative about things like action groups and knowledge bases that you can integrate within your Amazon Bedrock agent. As I said, we're not going to look at that. We're just going to do a very simple example just so you can get started very quickly. So before we go into the actual console and start to set up a Bedrock agent for the first time, we just want to have a look at the documentation here. And one thing I want to draw your attention to is a specific doc. It's called How Amazon Bedrock Agents Works. It's yet again more detailed than the blog post. It goes into a lot more of the sort of inner workings of how it works. And more specifically, I want you to have a look at this image over here. I'll just open it up. So this is how you would configure an Amazon Bedrock agent. You would provide all of these different things, and this would allow the agent to sort of autonomously interact within its environment. So for here, you would create an action group. So that's where you want to have an agent that interacts with external services. Knowledge bases are the way to access information from data stores. So if you wanted to go and query a database or fetch files from S3, that's what you would configure there. The prompt store is a way to manage different prompts. So if you wanted to have different variation in the way that you prompt your model, you might want to do that. So the main thing we're going to configure today is just this middle box where we're going to specify the model ID. So that's the language model that it's going to be using to do its sort of AI magic. And then we're going to provide it with some instructions. And when we do this, we're going to have the ability to give it a simple set of instructions. And then when we go to invoke it later, it's going to be able to respond according to those instructions. So with that in mind, let's head over to the console to start implementing our Amazon Bedrock agent. So here we are in the AWS console. The first thing we want to do is check that we're in the right region. So that's in the top right over here. The reason I'm bringing this up is because you need to make sure that whichever capabilities you want to use, you're in a region that supports those capabilities. More specifically, with Amazon Bedrock, there are certain capabilities that are only available in certain regions. I think the agent capability that we're using today is a little bit more widely available. So chances are that if you're in a major region, you will be able to use that region. But just refer to the AWS documentation to just make sure that the capabilities that we're going to cover today are in that region. For me, I'm going to use Ireland. I've confirmed that it is available there, and it's just the region that's closest to me. So the next thing we're going to do is head over to Amazon Bedrock console. If you've accessed it recently, you might have it over here, but if you haven't, you can go to the search here, type in Bedrock, and you can hit Amazon Bedrock. So now that we're in the Bedrock console, before we go and create the agent, we need to do one other thing first, and that is to enable model access. So if you are new to AWS or you've just recently created an account, you might not necessarily have access to all of the available Amazon Bedrock models. For this example, we're going to use Sonnet. It's part of the Anthropic collection of models. And in order to do that, you will need to enable it on your account. And it's an enablement per region as well. So if you have moved to a different region or you're doing this demo in a different region to what you would usually use, you will need to go through this process to enable the model for that particular region. So to do that, we go to the left and we go all the way down to the bottom to model access. And here's where we can see all of the different models that are either granted or where we can request access. You can see here for Anthropic, which is the ones that we're going to use, it says available to request. And what we need to do is just go to the top and click Modify Model Access. From here, we go down and we hit Anthropic. I'm just going to enable all of them. You can enable all of the different providers, or you can choose specifically which provider you want to use. This is really just up to you and as an organization, and it's also a bit of a governance thing. So if you want to make sure that your developers are using specific models, you can just enable them here. With those selected, I'm going to hit Next. You can read the terms and conditions, but from here, we'll just submit. So now that we've done the model access request, it should be either access granted. It might go into a bit of a pending state, and you might have to wait a couple of minutes before it is granted. But you should eventually have access, and it should show up as green in this view. So now the model is available. We can go over to the agents console if we go under build and agents. So here from the agents console, we're going to go over to create agent. So here you can give it a name. For this use case, we're going to create an email sorting agent. So I'm just going to give it a name that's very similar to that. So down here, this multi-agent collaboration feature, you don't need to enable it for this demo, but if you were to go to more complex use cases down the line, you might want to enable this from this panel. But for now, we don't need it. The description is optional, so I'll hit create. So now that we've created the agent, we are dropped into what is called the Agent Builder interface. And this is the UI where we get to configure all of the different capabilities of our agent. According to that blog post, you would be able to create action groups, which is how you interact with external services. You'd be able to plug into knowledge bases, which is, for instance, databases, or if you wanted to extract information from documents. But for our use case, we're not going to use action groups or knowledge bases. We're just going to have a simple prompt, which is going to tell the agent how to behave when it accepts new messages. So the name and description are from what we created earlier. You want to enable, create, and use service role. So what this means is in the background, Bedrock is going to be using some IAM roles and policies. And this just allows you to quickly and easily set those up in the background. If you want to have your own role, you can use that. But I would say that just for this demo, just keep it as create new service role. And that's going to automatically make sure that everything is going to work well for the demo. The next one is to select the model. You can either you have it selected here, or you can click this little button here. Depending on the models that you have enabled using the model access process, you will be able to see which ones are available here. So for instance, if I were to use Amazon, I can choose either of these. So we're going to use Anthropic, and we're going to use Claude 3.7 Sonnet v1. And the last thing here is the inference profile. By default, you do get a default inference profile, but what that means is that it's a way for Bedrock to know that it's able to access models across regions. And this is important to bear in mind, especially if you're in a regulated environment, is that sometimes you will have a cross-region inference by default. If you want to customize that, check the docs for inference profiles, and you can specifically lock down as to which regions you're allowed to do inference in. For us, it's not a specifically compliance-heavy demo, so we're just going to keep it with the default, and I'd recommend that you do this first if you're just following along on your own. From here, we're going to click Apply, and that's going to select the model for our agent. The next thing we want to do is we want to provide instructions for the agents. So if you've ever used ChatGPT or Claude from the user interfaces, you will know what a prompt is. But basically, this box here allows us to define exactly what the prompt is that we want to have. It can be quite a big prompt because the context for Claude is fairly large, but I'd recommend having a look at the Anthropic documentation because it goes into a lot of details about the best way to prompt Claude, and that will give you the best sort of outputs when it comes to prompt engineering. So I've pre-prepared a prompt for this demonstration, and I've got it in my temp store directory. If we go through it a little bit over here, the basic use case is that we're going to create an email processing assistant. What it's going to do is it's going to read incoming emails. It's going to figure out which is the best team to send that email to. And it's also going to send a response for that email. So it's going to act the same, almost like a personal assistant for this company. So what I've given it is a very basic information about what it needs to do. I've said it needs to be an email processing assistant. I've says it's going to categorize different emails. I've given a bit of a description of the company. I'm using these tags here because that's one of the best practices from the Claude prompting guides. And I've given it a little bit of a description of what the company is actually doing. So it's a logistics company in the manufacturing sector. Like, how big is the company? That just helps with the framing of the response. I've also given the teams that the different emails that come in can be categorized for. And I've given the name of the team, and I've given a little bit of details about what that team does. And Claude is going to be hopefully smart enough to know, what the context is from the email. It's going to pick out which is the best team to send it to, and then it's going to do a response. The last thing I've given is the actual task, and here I've just given step-by-step instructions. So I've said, read the email very carefully. I'm going to ask it to consider each team, decide which is the best fit. The other thing I've given is that if it can't find the best fit, it's going to respond with no match. And it's going to then figure out a response for the email. And I've also given a response format. So here it's going to be either the name of the team or it's going to say no match. And the response email, or the output response in this case, is going to be the email that is going to be sent back to the person who sent the initial request. So we're not actually going to send and receive emails directly. We're just going to prompt it with the body of an email and then have it do this categorization process and figure out which is the best team to send the email to. If this was part of a bigger system, the response would be either no match or the team. And then you could take that result and then you could then have logic to forward that email to the right place. And also, if you want, you can also have the email respond. Or you might want to have a human check that it is a good response to send back to the customer. So that is the prompt. I'm just going to copy it over and I'm going to head back to Bedrock console and I'm going to paste it in to our instructions for the agent. So with our prompt configured, there are a couple of other things you can have a look at. Especially under this additional settings, you can see that there's an option here called user input. Now, we're not going to use it for this demonstration today, but what you can do with this specific setting is you can define whether you want your agent to be able to ask for more information or ask for more user input. So for instance, if you have an agent that needs to clarify any information or any details, you might want to enable this. But for our use case, we're kind of assuming it's going to be a kind of linear event-driven flow. So the email is going to come in. We just want the agent to process it specifically according to our prompt. We don't want it to ask for more information or any more questions like that. And so we're just going to leave it as disabled for now. You can see things like action groups, memory, knowledge bases. We're not going to use any of that capability today because it's just a very simple introductory session. And so the last thing you want to do is go up to the top and just hit save. So with our agent saved, the last thing we want to do before we exit this view is we want to hit this prepare button. So what the prepare does is it collects all of the configuration from the agent builder and it puts it into a state that it is ready to be used for inference. So now that we've prepared the agent, we're going to go back to the email sorting agent at the top here. So the next thing we're going to do is create an alias. And an alias is essentially a way for you to point to different versions of your agent. This is really good because it allows you to have your code point to a specific alias. And then as you're developing and building your application, you can roll out new versions of your agent without necessarily updating the code. For our example today, we're just going to create a simple alias. You can hit the create alias at the top, or you can go down to the bottom and there's a create alias button at the bottom here too. We're going to give it an alias name. You can give a description. I'm not going to do that. And the last thing is just to ensure that this create new version is set. If this is the first time you are creating an agent version, it's going to be the only option. But if you already have multiple versions, you can actually select the version that you want this alias to point to. Remember what I said, an alias is actually just pointing to different versions so that you can swap out the versions with your application while it's in production. So with that set, we're going to hit create alias. So with the alias created, we can see that there is now a new version. If we open up the version, we can see that this is the version of our agent. It's pulled in the prompt, and it's basically got, if you had action groups and knowledge bases, you'd be able to see it here. But you can see that it's actually created a version, and that's kind of just a sort of snapshot of our agent that is going to be used when we do inference later. So the last thing we're going to do is just go back to the description. So from the detail view, we're going to need two pieces of information. We're going to need, first of all, the agent ID, which you can find as this value that's after the slash here. It's also up in the URL at the top here too. But the other thing we're going to need is the alias ID, which is down by the aliases here. So when we configure our code, we're going to give it both the agent ID, which is this string here, and the alias ID. And that's what's going to allow us to invoke our agent. So with everything set up in the console, we now can go over to the code and configure that and run our code. So here is the code, and as you can see, it's a very short, simple piece of code. It's linked below in a gist, so if you want, you can go down, have a look, copy the code. By all means, make use of it as much as you like. I'm using this .env package, which allows me to load environment variables from this .env file over here. But before we look at that .env file, I'll just show you a little bit of the inner workings. So the crux of this code is this process inbound email function. What it takes in is a message, and this message is just going to be a sample email body. And we're going to take that message and we're going to use it to invoke our agent. And to invoke our agent, we have a look at that function. We have this invoke agent method, which is being called on our Bedrock agent client. We're going to provide it with the agent ID, the alias ID, the input text, which is our message or our prompt. So the last one is the session ID, and the session ID is really a way for you to delineate between different conversations with your AI agent. And in this case, we're not necessarily going to need the session ID because it is a simple workflow where all it does is process the email and have a response. But if you were to have multiple steps in the agent flow, so maybe you wanted to first categorize and then you wanted it to find a person within a specific team, or you wanted to have further processing, you would need to keep that session ID and make sure that you're giving it back to the invoke agent call so that the agent keeps a track of which conversation it is involved with. For our use case, we don't necessarily need to use it, so we're just providing it with a random UUID. In your case, you might want to specifically tie it to something that's relevant to your application. So here in this .env file, it's quite simple. We only need those two inputs that I mentioned before. So the first one is our alias ID. So we'll go back to Bedrock console. We'll grab this alias ID down here, copy it. We'll just paste it in here. And then the Bedrock agent ID is, if we go back to the top, we just copy this little string at the end here. You don't need the whole ARN. And in fact, if you use the whole ARN, it might give an error. And I'm just going to save. And that's all the configuration we need to do for this specific piece of code. So to run this code, we're going to make use of IPython. And I'm going to just call it by saying IPython-I. Now, if you're not familiar with IPython, I'd recommend having a look at it. It is really useful if you are developing anything in Python. It allows you to play around with your application code in a very intuitive, interactive way. And so I'm going to do IPython-I main, and that's going to drop me into a shell that I can then start to invoke some of this functionality in my code. So remember, the use case is that we're going to be taking in different bodies of emails, and we're going to be categorizing them as to which team it needs to be forwarded to. And we also want the agent to respond with a short email response. If it thinks it's spam, or if it thinks it doesn't know which team to send it to, it's going to respond with no match and no response. So that's what we have. Let's start with a simple one. We're going to load in the first message. So to do that, we're going to go message, load message. I'm going to start with the logistics example. And if I print message, we can see that the example here is just a simple shipment ID query. And so what I'm going to do to process this is I'm going to just call the process inbound email function with the message as a parameter. It'll take a couple of seconds, and then what you'll see is a result. And because we're printing it out nicely, you can see here it's correctly identified that it needs to go to the logistics team, and it is created a draft response here. And you can see it's just a simple sort of helpful response. So this output at the bottom here is just the session ID and a little bit more of the sort of raw output, but what you want to see is just being done by this print response function. Let's try another one. Let's try load in the message. I've got one specifically set up for spam, and let's print it out. So you can see it's just giving a free giveaway. It's kind of like a sort of holiday sort of typical spam message. I'm again going to process inbound email with the message. And here we get a different response. We can see it says no match, and it's got no output response. It's also responded with this other text. This is specific to the prompting style. So sometimes you need to be a little bit more explicit about what exactly to respond with. But again, have a look at the Anthropic docs to get a little bit more details on how to get really specific with the response. So the reason I've actually asked it to have this tag notation is that even though it's responded with more text, if I were to pass this output, I could just pass the details of what's inside output team and output response. So that just makes it easier if I want to do some sort of further processing down the line. Now I've loaded the examples into the code as well, so you can play around with the different types of email bodies. I won't go through all of them just because of time reasons, but you can see that it's a very simple agent. It's able to follow the instructions we've given it, and we've been able to invoke the agent using Python. So the last thing I want to do is just show you how to delete everything, and that way you won't incur any extra costs going forward. So to do this, we go back to the Bedrock console. We're going to go over to agents. We're just going to hit this dot over here, and you can just hit delete. It'll ask for a confirmation, and we're going to just choose delete. It took about 5 seconds to delete, but now that it's deleted, you shouldn't worry. It won't incur any extra costs. So that's it for the session. Hopefully you found it useful. Hopefully you've been able to get an agent up and running. The last thing I'll say is that we will be going through more and more details within the Amazon Bedrock agent service in future videos. So stay tuned for that, and let me know in the comments if you want to see specific parts of Amazon Bedrock or Amazon Bedrock agents covered in future videos. Thank you for watching, and cheers.